What happens when a calm, composed Hollywood icon sits across from a political voice who isn't afraid to push back? Live, unscripted, and with millions watching. Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The camera opens on the bright, familiar set of The View. The audience is already warmed up, light applause rolling as the hosts settle into their seats. There's a buzz in the room. Today's guest isn't just any celebrity. Cate Blanchett walks out, poised as ever, smiling graciously as she waves to the crowd. The applause swells. She's clearly respected here. She takes her seat, crossing her legs neatly, offering a warm thank you as the hosts welcome her. Joy leans in first, smiling. Cate, you've played queens, revolutionaries, and now you're here with us. Are you ready for this kind of chaos? The audience laughs lightly. Cate smiles back, calm. I've played some complicated characters. I think I'll survive. There's a soft chuckle across the table. Whoopi nods. That's confidence right there. Then Alyssa Farah Griffin jumps in, leaning forward slightly. I'm curious though, Cate, you've taken on a lot of roles that deal with power, politics, systems. How much of that is personal for you? Cate pauses, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. I think storytelling always reflects something real. Even when you're in a fictional world, there's truth underneath it. That's what connects people. Alyssa nods, but her expression tightens just a bit. Sure, but sometimes it feels like Hollywood leans heavily in one direction when it comes to those truths. Do you think that creates a kind of imbalance? There's a subtle shift in the room. The audience quiets, not completely, but enough that you can feel attention sharpening. Cate keeps her composure. I think any industry can lean in different directions depending on who's telling the stories. But I don't see storytelling as something that should be boxed into a political lane. Alyssa tilts her head slightly. But don't you think it already is? I mean, when audiences are constantly being presented with a certain perspective, it shapes how they think. That's influence. Joy raises her eyebrows, sensing where this is going. Cate responds carefully. Influence exists everywhere, news, media, politics. The question is whether we're encouraging people to think critically or just telling them what to think. A small ripple of applause comes from part of the audience. Alyssa smiles, but it's the kind of smile that signals she's not backing down. Right, but if most of the voices are coming from one side, is that really encouraging critical thinking? Or is it reinforcing a single narrative? Whoopi interjects gently, trying to keep things balanced. Let's not pretend this table doesn't have different views every day. The audience laughs lightly, easing the tension for a second. But Alyssa continues, still focused. I'm not talking about this table. I'm talking about the broader industry. Someone like you, Cate, you have a massive platform. When you speak on issues, people listen. Do you ever feel a responsibility to represent more than just one viewpoint? There it is. The shift is clear now. Cate leans back slightly, still calm, but more direct. I feel a responsibility to be honest. That's different from trying to represent every possible viewpoint. I don't think any one person can or should do that. A few audience members clap again, a little louder this time. Alyssa nods slowly. But honesty can still be selective, right? Everyone believes they're being honest, even when they're only showing part of the picture. Joy quietly mutters, "Here we go," under her breath, getting a laugh from the crowd. Cate's expression softens, but her tone becomes firmer. That's why it's important to have multiple voices, not silence the ones you disagree with. The audience reacts, some applause, a few murmurs. Alyssa leans in just a bit more. I'm not saying silence anyone. I'm saying acknowledge the imbalance. Because a lot of people feel like their perspectives aren't represented in spaces like Hollywood. Whoopi raises a hand slightly, stepping in. And a lot of people feel overrepresented in others. That's the world we live in. The audience claps again, but now it's mixed, some louder, some hesitant. Cate turns slightly toward Alyssa, still composed. I think the danger is assuming that art should function like a political checklist. That's not its role. Alyssa responds quickly. But it already functions as influence, whether intentional or not. There's a brief pause. For the first time, Cate doesn't immediately respond. The silence isn't awkward, it's charged. Sunny jumps in, trying to smooth things slightly. I think what Alyssa's getting at is the impact, whether artists realize it or not. Cate nods, acknowledging the point. Of course there's impact. But impact doesn't mean obligation to present all sides equally. It means being truthful in the story you're telling. Alyssa's tone sharpens just a notch. But who decides what's truthful? The audience reacts, some oohs ripple through the crowd. Joy leans back, watching closely now. Cate looks directly at Alyssa. The audience does. Over time. That's the beauty of storytelling. It evolves. Alyssa crosses her arms lightly, not defensive but firm. Or it just keeps repeating the same perspectives because those are the ones being funded and promoted. Now the tension is unmistakable. Whoopi steps in again, her voice steady. We're not going to solve Hollywood's structure in one segment. The audience laughs, breaking the tension just slightly. But Cate speaks again, this time more pointed. I don't think dismissing artists as part of some unified agenda is helpful. It oversimplifies a very complex space. Alyssa replies almost immediately. And I don't think ignoring patterns is helpful either. Another pause. This one is heavier. The camera briefly cuts to the audience, some nodding, some whispering, clearly engaged. Sunny looks between them. This is actually a really important conversation. Joy adds, yeah, and we haven't even gotten to her movie yet. The audience laughs again, but it doesn't fully release the tension. Cate smiles politely, but there's a clear shift. She's no longer just promoting a film. She's in a debate. Alyssa adjusts slightly in her seat, still focused, still composed, but clearly not done. And the energy at the table? It's only just getting started. The moment lingers, and even as the audience laughter fades, the tension doesn't fully go with it. You can feel it sitting right there at the table, unspoken but very present. Whoopi leans forward slightly, trying to keep things moving. All right, let's take a breath for a second, because I actually want to hear about the work too. Cate, you've got this new project. Cate nods politely, grateful for the pivot. Yes, it's a film that really explores identity and... But before she can fully settle into it, Alyssa Farah Griffin gently cuts back in. Not aggressively, but deliberately. I actually think this ties into what we were just talking about, she says, turning slightly toward Cate again. Because a lot of these films, especially the ones that get the most attention, they're not just stories. They're statements. There's a slight shift in the audience again. Some people lean forward. Cate keeps her composure. All stories are statements in some way. Alyssa nods. Right, but some are more pointed than others. Joy exhales softly, almost amused. She's not letting you off the hook, Cate. A small ripple of laughter moves through the audience. Cate smiles faintly. I can see that, but there's a new firmness in her tone now. I don't think making a film with a perspective is the same as pushing an agenda. Alyssa responds quickly. But how do you separate the two when the same types of perspectives keep being elevated? The audience murmurs, some agreement, some hesitation. Sunny jumps in, her voice calm but engaged. But Alyssa, isn't that also about audience demand? These films succeed because people connect with them. Alyssa turns to her briefly. Sure, but what gets made in the first place matters too. Not every story has the same opportunity. Cate leans in slightly now, more engaged than before. That's true across every industry, though. Not just film. Alyssa nods. But film has cultural power. It shapes how people see the world, how they see each other. Cate doesn't deny that. Yes, it can. But I think we're underestimating audiences if we assume they're just absorbing everything without question. Joy snaps her fingers lightly. Exactly. People aren't robots. The audience laughs, but again, it's mixed. Some claps, some quiet. Alyssa holds her ground. I'm not saying people are robots. I'm saying repeated messaging has an effect. That's just reality. Whoopi raises an eyebrow slightly. So does everything else people consume. Alyssa glances at her, then back to Cate. Which is why it matters who's doing the messaging. There's a brief pause. Cate takes a breath, not defensive, but clearly choosing her words more carefully now. I think what concerns me is the idea that artists should constantly be second-guessing whether their work is balanced enough. That can be paralyzing. A few audience members clap at that. Alyssa responds, her tone steady but more intense. Or it could be grounding. It could make people more aware of the impact they're having. Cate tilts her head slightly. Awareness is important, but self-censorship isn't the same thing. That lands. There's a noticeable reaction, some sounds from the audience. Sunny nods. That's a fair distinction. But Alyssa doesn't let it go. Is it self-censorship or accountability? Now the room gets quieter. Joy leans back, eyes moving between them. This is getting good. The audience laughs again, but more softly this time. Cate looks directly at Alyssa, her tone calm but unmistakably firmer. Accountability to what, though? To who? That's where it gets complicated. Alyssa answers immediately. To the public. To the people who are being influenced by what they're seeing. Cate nods slowly. But the public isn't one unified voice. It's millions of individuals with different perspectives. Alyssa counters, and many of those individuals feel like their perspectives aren't being reflected. Whoopi jumps in again, trying to keep the balance. And many feel like they finally are being reflected after a long time of not being seen. The audience reacts strongly to that, applause, louder this time. Alyssa acknowledges it with a slight nod. That's true, but inclusion shouldn't come at the cost of excluding other viewpoints. Cate responds, but inclusion often feels like exclusion to those who were previously centered. That line lands hard. The audience reacts, some clapping, some audible reactions. Joy looks impressed. Okay, Cate. Alyssa pauses for just a second. One of the first moments she doesn't jump right back in. But then she leans forward again. I understand that perspective. I really do. But I think we have to be careful not to swing so far in one direction that we create a new imbalance. Cate doesn't back away. Or maybe we're just noticing the imbalance now because it's no longer invisible. Another wave of reactions, this time louder, more divided. The tension is no longer subtle. It's right out in the open. Sunny raises her hand slightly. Okay, this is why people watch this show. The audience laughs, but it's nervous laughter now. Whoopi exhales. And we still have to get through the rest of the segment. Joy adds, barely. Alyssa turns slightly, addressing the table, but still clearly speaking to Cate. I think people at home are probably seeing both sides of this and feeling the tension, because it's real. Cate nods. It is real. And I don't think it's something that gets solved by asking artists to dilute their voices. Alyssa responds, or by ignoring the responsibility that comes with having such a powerful platform. Cate's expression tightens just slightly, not angry, but more serious now. Responsibility doesn't mean neutrality. Alyssa fires back. It also doesn't mean dismissing concerns. The audience reacts again, some louder voices now, a mix of agreement and disagreement. Whoopi raises her voice just a bit. All right, let's not talk over each other. There's a brief pause as both women lean back slightly. But the energy doesn't settle. Joy looks at Cate. Did you expect this when you came in today? The audience laughs again. Cate gives a small smile. I expected a conversation. Joy grins. Well, you got one. Alyssa adds, almost under her breath but still audible. And we're not done yet. That gets a reaction, some laughter, some claps. The camera cuts briefly to the audience again, faces engaged, some whispering to each other, clearly invested in what's unfolding. Sunny leans forward. I actually want to ask something that might bridge this a little. Cate, when you choose roles, are you thinking about the message at all? Or is it purely the story? Cate turns to her, appreciating the shift. It's always the story first. But of course, you're aware of the themes. You can't not be. Alyssa jumps back in, gently but persistently. And do those themes ever make you hesitate? If you know they might be interpreted a certain way. Cate answers honestly. Sometimes. But if you start choosing roles based on how they might be interpreted by every possible viewpoint, you'd never do anything. The audience claps again, this time more unified. Alyssa nods slowly, but her expression says she's still not convinced. And the conversation? It's no longer just a discussion. It's a live, unfolding clash, with neither side ready to step back. The applause fades, but the atmosphere doesn't relax. If anything, it feels tighter now, like everyone in the room knows they're watching something that's no longer just a casual segment. Whoopi leans forward again, her tone measured but firmer now. All right, we're going to keep this respectful because this is a good conversation, but we're not going to turn it into people talking over each other. There's a light round of applause from the audience. Part agreement, part relief. Cate nods slightly, composed as ever. Cate Blanchett hasn't raised her voice once, but there's a noticeable shift in how direct she's become. Across from her, Alyssa Farah Griffin adjusts in her seat again, shoulders squared, clearly ready to continue, but a bit more controlled now. Joy glances between them. Okay, so let me ask something simple, because I feel like we're circling a big idea here. Is the issue really about storytelling? Or is it about who gets to control the narrative? The audience reacts, soft sounds, a few claps. Alyssa answers first this time. It's both. Because the people telling the stories often shape the narrative in ways that aren't always obvious, but they're powerful. Cate responds, not missing a beat. But that's always been the case. Storytelling has never been neutral. Alyssa nods. Exactly. Which is why it matters who's doing it. Cate leans slightly forward now, her tone still calm but more pointed than earlier. And I think what's changed is that more voices are being included, voices that weren't part of that process before. The audience claps, louder this time, more confident. Alyssa doesn't push back immediately. Instead, she pauses, just briefly, before responding. That's true, but I think some people feel like in the process of expanding voices, others are being pushed out. Sunny jumps in quickly. Or maybe they're just not the only voice anymore. The audience reacts strongly, applause, a few louder cheers. Alyssa turns to Sunny, keeping her tone steady. And that's a fair point. But there's a difference between not being the only voice and feeling like your perspective isn't welcome at all. Joy raises her eyebrows. But is that perception or reality? Alyssa looks back at her. For a lot of people, it feels real. There's a pause. Cate watches Alyssa closely now, not confrontational, but very focused. Then she speaks, more deliberately than before. I don't think anyone should feel like their perspective isn't welcome. But I also don't think discomfort means exclusion. That line lands hard. The audience reacts immediately, some clapping, some audible reactions. Whoopi nods slowly. Say that again. Cate doesn't repeat it, but she continues. When the conversation shifts, when new stories are told, it can feel uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean someone is being shut out. It might just mean they're not centered anymore. A louder reaction this time, applause mixed with a few scattered, yes. Alyssa exhales quietly, then leans in again. But when people feel like their views are constantly portrayed in a negative light, or not portrayed at all, that's more than just discomfort. Cate replies, or it's a reflection of the stories being told right now. Alyssa shakes her head slightly. But who decides which stories get told? That's the whole point. Joy leans in, clearly engaged. Money. Studios. Audiences. It's not just one thing. Alyssa nods. Exactly. And those systems aren't neutral either. Cate agrees with that. No system is. But the solution isn't to limit storytelling. It's to expand it. The audience claps again, stronger, more unified. Alyssa responds quickly, her tone rising just slightly. Not shouting, but more urgent. But expanding it shouldn't mean dismissing concerns about bias. Cate meets her directly now. And raising concerns about bias shouldn't turn into questioning the legitimacy of every story that doesn't align with your perspective. That hits. There's an audible reaction, some oohs, some applause, some tension. Whoopi raises a hand again. All right. But Alyssa speaks again, a little faster now. I'm not questioning legitimacy. I'm questioning balance. Cate responds just as quickly. Balance according to who? Alyssa answers immediately. According to a broader range of perspectives. Cate shakes her head slightly. But that's not something any one artist can solve. That's a systemic issue. Alyssa leans forward. And yet individual voices still contribute to that system. There's a beat. The two of them are fully locked into the conversation now. No interruptions, no deflection. Sunny watches closely, clearly aware of how intense this has become. This is the kind of conversation that people have at home, but not always this openly. Joy nods. Yeah, except at home people can mute each other. The audience laughs, finally breaking some of the tension, but only for a moment. Cate speaks again, quieter this time, but somehow more impactful. I think there's a danger in expecting art to function as a perfect representation of every viewpoint. That's not what it's for. Alyssa responds, just as focused. And I think there's a danger in dismissing the influence that art has on how people think and feel. Whoopi leans forward again, her voice calm but firm. Both of those things can be true. There's a pause. The audience reacts with a small round of applause, less intense but more thoughtful. Cate nods slightly. I agree with that. Alyssa nods too, but adds, but agreeing on that doesn't solve the problem. Cate gives a small, almost knowing smile. Maybe it's not something that gets solved in a single conversation. Joy laughs softly. Definitely not this one. The audience laughs again, but now there's a sense that something deeper has been exposed. Alyssa shifts slightly, her tone softening, but only just a little. I think what I'm trying to say is, people want to feel seen. And when they don't, they start to question the systems that shape what they're seeing. Cate listens carefully. This time, she doesn't interrupt. Then she responds slower, more reflective. And I think that's valid. But I also think being seen doesn't mean always being affirmed. That line lands just as strongly as the others. The audience reacts again, some applause, some murmurs. Sunny nods thoughtfully. That's a tough balance. Alyssa looks at Cate for a moment, really looks at her, before responding. It is. And maybe that's why these conversations get so heated. Cate gives a slight nod. Because they matter. There's a quiet moment. Not awkward, just real. Whoopi takes that moment to step in again. All right, before we all start running for office. The audience bursts into laughter. Joy adds, speak for yourself. More laughter. But even with the humor, the tension hasn't fully disappeared. It's just shifted. The conversation has moved past surface-level disagreement into something deeper, and neither side is pretending otherwise anymore. Whoopi turns slightly toward Cate. I do want to bring it back, just for a minute, to your film. Because despite all this, she gestures between them, that's why you're here. The audience laughs again. Cate smiles politely, but there's still a seriousness in her expression. Of course, Whoopi continues. Does any of this conversation we're having, connect to what audiences will see in your performance? Cate considers the question carefully. Alyssa watches her closely. The audience leans in again. And for a moment, it feels like the answer could either calm things down or take the entire conversation somewhere even deeper. Cate takes a small breath before answering, her posture still composed, but her tone now carrying the weight of everything that's just unfolded. I think what audiences will see is a story about complexity, she says. About people who don't fit neatly into categories. And maybe that connects to this, because we're all trying to make sense of perspectives that don't always align. There's a quiet pause. The audience listens closely, no interruptions this time. Alyssa Farah Griffin nods slowly, but her expression is still thoughtful, still processing. I actually appreciate that, she says. Because I don't think people want everything to be simple. They just want to feel like their perspective isn't being dismissed. Cate responds gently but firmly. And I don't think it should be dismissed. But I also think disagreement doesn't equal dismissal. That line lands softer than the earlier ones, but it still lands. The audience gives a light round of applause. Whoopi leans back slightly, exhaling. Okay, now that feels like a place we can actually sit for a second. Joy nods. Yeah, we made it through. The audience laughs, this time more relaxed. Sunny smiles, glancing between them. I think what people just saw is what real conversations look like when people don't fully agree, but still stay in it. There's a stronger round of applause now. Alyssa adds, and that's something we don't see enough of, honestly. Cate gives a small nod. I agree with that. For the first time since the tension started, there's a noticeable easing at the table. Not complete agreement, but mutual acknowledgement. Whoopi takes that moment to shift the energy. All right, now we're going to actually let Cate talk about her movie, because I know the studio's watching like, what just happened? The audience bursts into laughter. Joy adds, they're sweating right now. More laughter. Cate smiles, this time more relaxed. It's all right. I think the conversation is part of the experience. Whoopi gestures toward her. Go ahead, tell people why they should watch. Cate leans in slightly, returning to a more familiar rhythm. It's a story about identity, about how we define ourselves and each other. And I think, especially now, those are conversations worth having. The audience claps, genuine, steady. The segment begins to wind down, but the energy from what just happened doesn't disappear. It lingers. Whoopi turns to the camera. We'll be right back. The music starts, the audience applauds, and the camera slowly pulls back. But even as the show cuts to commercial, you can see it. Hosts leaning toward each other, a few quiet side comments, small smiles, and thoughtful expressions. The conversation didn't end, it just moved off air. After the break, things continue more lightly, but the earlier moment clearly sticks. The panel moves on to other topics, but there are subtle references, little glances, brief callbacks, the kind that viewers at home definitely notice. And the audience? They're still talking about it. Even during the commercial pause, you can hear murmurs, people turning to each other, reacting in real time. By the time the show wraps, the atmosphere is calmer, but charged in a different way. Like something meaningful actually happened. Whoopi closes out the episode with her usual tone, but there's a slight emphasis in her voice. These are the conversations that matter. Applause fills the studio. Cate stands, exchanging polite hugs with the hosts. When she reaches Alyssa, there's a brief moment, just a second, where they make eye contact. Alyssa smiles. Not overly warm, not cold either, just real. Thank you for engaging, she says quietly. Cate nods. Thank you for the conversation. It's short, but it says a lot. They separate, wave to the audience, and the show ends. But that's where things really begin. Within minutes, clips from the view start circulating online. Short segments, some showing the most intense exchanges, others highlighting the quieter, more reflective moments. Social media lights up. Some viewers are firmly on Cate's side, praising Cate Blanchett for staying calm, for articulating her points clearly, for not backing down while still remaining composed. Others support Alyssa, arguing that Alyssa Farah Griffin raised valid concerns, that she asked the questions many people feel aren't asked enough in spaces like this. Clips of their exchange start trending. Comment sections fill up fast. Some viewers say, "This is what real conversation looks like." Others say, "This is exactly the divide we're dealing with." And then there are those pointing out something else entirely, that despite the disagreement, neither of them walked away, neither shut down, neither refused to engage. That becomes part of the story too. Media outlets pick it up, breaking down the moment, analyzing who said what, who won, what it means. But the truth is, it didn't feel like anyone won. It felt like something more real than that. Backstage, after the show, there's a quieter version of the same energy. Producers talk among themselves, some impressed, some slightly stunned by how far the conversation went on live television. One of the staff members mentions, "That's going viral for sure." Another nods. "It already is." Cate is seen speaking briefly with her team, calm as ever, but clearly aware that the moment has extended beyond the studio. Alyssa, on the other side, is also in conversation, her tone measured but engaged, as if she's still thinking through everything that was said. There's no dramatic confrontation backstage. No raised voices. Just reflection. Because the real intensity already happened, on air. Later that day, both sides address it in their own way. Alyssa posts a short message, thanking viewers for engaging in a conversation that isn't always easy, but is necessary. Cate, in a brief interview clip shared online, simply says, "It's important to stay in dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable." Those clips get shared just as widely as the original moment. And the conversation continues. By the next day, it's still being discussed. Commentators, fans, critics, everyone has an opinion. But one thing most people seem to agree on? It didn't feel staged. It didn't feel scripted. It felt like something that could happen in any real conversation, just amplified by the platform. Back in the studio, the hosts reference it again the following episode. Joy jokes, "We survived." The audience laughs. Whoopi adds, "And we'll probably do it again." More laughter, but there's truth in it. Because that's what the show does. It brings different perspectives together, sometimes smoothly, sometimes not. And that moment between Cate and Alyssa? It becomes one of those clips people come back to. Not because it was explosive, but because it was real. If you watched this far, you saw exactly how quickly a conversation can shift, from light promotion to something deeper, something more personal, something that people care about. Now we want to hear from you. Whose side did you find yourself agreeing with? Do you think conversations like this help, or just create more division? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories.